Hello and welcome to RPG Tips again. I am Jose and this is a very special episode because I'm not alone, as you can see if you're watching. I'm with John, who's the creator of possibly one of the most unique products in the solo RPG sphere, which is Tale of the Manticore. Well, I'm going to let John explain it because I don't want to butcher it. But before we get into that, John, why don't you tell us who is behind Tale of Manticore? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me on the show very much, by the way. Really happy to kind of virtually be here with you and chatting on this Sunday afternoon or evening for you. Mm-hmm. Gosh, a little bit about me. I'm one of those guys that was away from the game for like decades. I played it when I was a kid, started when I was, I think, 11 or 12, using the purple edition of basic rules, and played a little bit of like first and second edition into high school. But then the stigma was just too much. This was back in the late 80s when the stigma was like serious business. I know when you spoke to Trevor Duvall, he was talking about the same thing. So I won't belabor the point and make you go through it again, but believe you me, and he and I are about the same age, I guess. The stigma was real. It was kind of social anathema to be a gamer back then, and it's still part of me can't quite get over that hang up of it being so desperately nerdy, as it was back then. So anyway, eventually it was kind of like you could choose between gaming or ever having a girlfriend, and so I chose the latter. Is it true though? Yeah, I chose the latter. I gave up the game. I went and did other things. I went to university, and all through my 20s and all through my 30s, it was gone. And somehow, now I'm in my 40s, and about a year ago, actually, I ended up kind of coming back to the table. It wasn't really coming back to the table because of COVID-19, there is no table, and there are no players, not really. And so I came back to it the only way I could, through the solo method, which is something I never would have thought of or chosen or gravitated to or even had any interest in. I still don't consider myself a solo gamer, which is weird because I guess I am. But I guess if I wasn't making a show about that game, I wouldn't be playing it. You know, if it was like a desert island situation, mm-hmm. I don't think so. I think it needs that audience, perceived or real, whichever it may be. And without that, I don't think I'd be doing it. Strange, huh? Anyway, so that's kind of where I'm coming to the game from, as a kind of a long time away return to the table gamer, a little bit white whiskered now, and somehow when I come back into this community, of course there was really no community when I was a kid. Now it seems like there's like a niche of OSR people, and I guess that's where I am assigned. That's my space in the biosphere of RPGs now.
I think that's indeed very much true, and it's something that I have written down to talk about systems. But indeed, I think that based on the games that we both play in our shows, we both end up in the OSR sphere of things. But that's very interesting. So now that we know you a bit more, what is actually Tale of a Manticore? Now you can explain it in detail.
The elevator pitch.
Or the extended elevator pitch. The elevator is broken down.
Okay. You just give me some kind of hand signal if I'm rambling.
Don't worry.
Okay, so the idea of it was to do a kind of a semi-actual play. So I wanted it to be like a narration or a kind of an audio drama, even something like a radio drama that you may have heard from the 30s or 40s or 50s, that kind of thing. I wanted it to have like the sound effects and the music and the narration be in third person instead of the usual second person of RPG play. But at the same time, I didn't want there to be a story arc or any kind of teleological structure to it, by which I mean like there couldn't be an end. I couldn't know what was going to happen next. I couldn't know what the result of really almost anything was going to be. And so I wasn't going to be an author, rather be a gamer, but sort of describe the game in narration. And so the way it kind of turns out is, it's as if there was a solo game that was then translated into a novel. And so there's dice rolling, there's a lot of stuff left up to chance, and I don't ever know what's going to happen next or who will survive. Characters don't get to live just because they're main characters. There's no like plot armor, so to speak. And so it's continually like surprising me and keeping my brain very active to try and interpret dice rolls and to kind of imagine, okay, so this has happened. What's logically going to happen next? Sorry, that's a really crappy elevator pitch, but luckily I'm not in Hollywood or in the movie business.
It's all right. So
you get the idea, maybe.
Indeed. If somebody were approaching your product for the first time, what's the main difference you would say Tale of Manticore has with any other like actual played podcast or video or any kind of typical actual play of a role-playing game, solo or not?
Right on. Yeah, I think mine is almost different from anything else that I've seen. And actually, I wish it wasn't, because I would listen the shit. Can I swear? I would listen to any podcast that that kind of followed this format. And if any of your listeners are kind of thinking, hey, I want to get into podcasting or making a story, I would like completely recommend doing this model, because there's so much room for people to jump in and make cool stuff. Basically, the difference is it's not improvised. That's one difference, is not improvised. There's pros and cons to that, I think, right? Because it's not improvised, it's a lot less sort of, well, spontaneous, I guess. It's not going to have a kind of an off-the-cuff feel to it. But I guess the pro is that I can really think things through. And one of the nice things about working this way is that I do actually get to think about my story pretty much all the time, on the way to work, on my lunch break, on the way back, having dinner, whatever. Watching a movie, someone gives you an idea. And so it's sort of gaming at a glacially slow speed. And that makes all the difference, I think, because it means that instead of just sort of off the dome ideas, that might be okay. They might be good. They might be shit. I can replace them with better ideas as I think of them. And I think it's made it richer. So one difference would be like not improvised. Another difference for mine anyway is that it's not comedy, partly just because I'm not very funny, and partly because there are so many. Actually, this is like a hang up of mine. There are so many comedy D&D podcasts. It's like that's what a D&D podcast is a comedy podcast. It's not the exception. It's really strange to me. If you go to a bookstore, if you go to well, I guess they don't exist anymore, but like video stores that we used to, whatever, you go to anywhere to get like a movie, a book, or whatever, the sort of the comedy, the spoof, the parody, that would all be like a section, but a small section. And then most stuff would be action, drama, horror, and all the other things. But for some reason, D&D podcasts are flipped around. And now 99% maybe of D&D podcasts are kind of zany comedies, which may or may not be really, really funny. Some of them are great, and I'm a fan of a bunch of them. a lot of them are not funny at all. I guess it's one thing to listen to the Adventure Zone and laugh. It's another thing to be the Adventure Zone and be funny. And I think there might be a few people that are confused on that issue. But anyway, no shade to any creators out there.
A very interesting take, actually, because indeed, and this ties up perfectly with the next question that I had. You've ended up, well, your area of competition, if one could put it that way, is the podcast area.
Yeah.
And indeed, the biosphere of podcasts is quite different from the biosphere of YouTube videos, for instance.
Right.
In YouTube, for solo, well, you've got Trevor, you've got Geek Gamers, Solo RPG Guy, some other guys. I mean, me, but I don't count. But that's much, much different from the podcasts. And I hadn't realized, you're completely right, that I think that possibly that tendency to comedy may be due to the normal tendency of people to goof around, that just gets maybe amplified or codified as in, well, okay, this is what we are doing naturally, so let's do it as a product. But indeed, producing a serious thing that is also improvised requires a lot of effort and possibly technical knowledge. Like,
there's only a couple.
They're all voice actors.
Yeah, there's only a couple. And I think it's just a social thing. You know, you got a bunch of folks together, you play some D&D, and you have some laughs, and then it's logical. You think like, well, we're funny guys, and let's contribute to this world of kind of zany podcasting. It makes total sense. But anyway, it's kind of a advantage for me, maybe, because at least if people are listening to me, like I'm one of the only podcasts that kind of does this. Like, if anybody wants Game of Thrones serious, there aren't too many places to get it in podcasts. There's the Turncloaks. That was very good. It ended abruptly, mysteriously. I don't know why. There's the Red Moon RPG, which I've just discovered, and that's really, really good stuff too. There's the Iron Realm. I don't know that I could name 5. I think there's very few. There's the Cast Perilous. They're a serious RPG. I don't think I could name 5. I think I might have just listed all of the ones I know of. Yeah, and anyway, so if people want that kind of Game of Thrones-esque, Tolkien-esque, if they want serious fantasy, whatever that term means, because that's a bit of an oxymoron maybe, there just aren't very many people making it, period. So I guess that's good for me. I mean, assuming that there's an audience that wants that stuff, it's good for me, right?
I'm sure that there is. So this, as I said, ties up perfectly with the next question. What made you create a podcast opposed to a blog, YouTube videos, a novel, a comic, whatever?
Yeah, a few things. Let me see, I'll try and be less scatterbrained in my answer this time. I'm a terrible interviewee. I'm all over the place, but sorry, that's how my brain works.
It's okay.
So I made a podcast mostly because I had gotten into podcasts. I have a commute to work, and so I started to, as I was like kind of inching back to the gaming table, I just wanted to have some RPG stuff in my life. I discovered the Adventure Zone. So many people have that same story, right? They discovered that just because it made such a big noise, and because it is so good. It's so good. And so I loved it, and I thought, well, maybe there's more stuff like that. And so I started looking, and then I thought, well, maybe there's like serious stuff. And then I drove myself crazy trying to find anything that was like a serious game. All I really wanted was to have that D&D game experience kind of, piped into my ears. And I looked and I looked and I looked to the point where I would like just download everything, listen to usually about 1 or 2 minutes where they introduce the characters. And if there was anything like Dragonborn, delete. Monk, delete. Samurai, delete. What do they call the tiefling? Delete. Almost anything that kind of like didn't fit my, I guess, admittedly narrow view of what fantasy should be, delete. Finally, I found one. It was the Iron Realm podcast, and it was perfect for me, exactly what I wanted. It was old school, one guy, dice, dungeon crawling. I loved it. And I thought, oh, I've got to find another 20 like this. And I found no more like that. And I really looked. And then I kind of thought, maybe I could make one. This was before I realized that everybody has a podcast, but anyway, now we all do. I thought, well, maybe I can. And so, of course, my first thought was like, no. I just want to find them. I don't want to make them. I want to listen to them. I like to read books, but I don't particularly want to write a book. But then I started thinking about all of the reasons why I should, and they just started to pile up. I have a studio in my bedroom. I used to be a musician, and now I'm kind of an amateur audio engineer. I'm a high school teacher, actually, by my day job. But I dabble in audio engineering, and I write music. And I thought, wow, wait a minute, I'm into gaming. I make audio. I make music. There's like I own really nice microphones. There's no reason why I shouldn't do exactly this thing. So that's why for me it was podcasting and not, say, YouTube. I don't think I would have known how to do what you do or what Trevor
Me neither,
does.
honestly.
I don't think I could have figured it out. But the audio medium is kind of a two-dimensional medium, right? It's just very manageable and it's minimalist. If there's too much stuff going on, it's distracting. So you want to kind of have like a voice and maybe a non-obtrusive soundtrack, and then a couple of sound effects to trigger imaginative sparks, but not to provide a full picture, just the impressions. Mm-hmm. And I thought I can do this. And again, I really just wanted to find a bunch to listen to, but nobody else was making them. So I thought, well, there's no reason for me not to do this. So I started, and actually at first it was this huge secret, because referencing back to my earlier fear of the D&D stigma, I didn't want my partner to know. And so everything was in secret. I mixed on headphones. I even tried to record in my classroom after the students left. I didn't want anybody to know. I would have been mortified if my coworkers found out. They still don't know and won't. I didn't want my partner to know. My friends would have lambasted me if they found out. They still probably would. Because again, they're my age. And so to young people don't care, but people my age, they can't get over it. That whole satanic panic thing, it left its mark and we just can't get over it. Anyway, so eventually my partner realized that I was doing something, and then COVID happened. Everybody was indoors. I had all the time in the world to make this thing, but no privacy at all. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I have to come out of the closet. And so I did. I came out of the closet to my partner, and I was super nervous about doing it.
Honey, I play RPGs.
Yeah. It's a huge reveal. It would have been easier to say,
"This is
honey,
who
I have a heroin problem," or something like that. That might have been easier for me. So I came out, and I mean, she totally was like, "Yeah, that's great." She didn't care at all. In fact, she was like, "Yeah, I kind of knew." But
exactly like being gay.
Totally, yeah. It's like absolutely foolish of me to think that nobody was noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rolling dice.
But, yeah, exactly. I'm ordering dice from eBay. Just, what are these? Nothing.
Yeah, just going to snort them.
As you were. Anyway, so she in fact voices one of the characters. She's not like super duper into it. But she participates, she listens to it, and she voices character Aradine, who has somehow survived, and not because she's my partner, but that's just what the dice decided would happen. If the dice decided that she would shuffle off this mortal coil, then I guess that's what would happen.
So I think that your answer was very interesting because, I mean, of course, I don't have any background in any kind of entertainment industry. I mean, I'm an engineer and a PhD, so I'm on the boring side of things. But from what I've seen on the very brief experience I have here, is that we all bring our backgrounds to what we want to see in the world. And in fact, you started this podcast because you were an audio engineer and you wanted to have dark fantasy podcasts to listen to. I started the channel because I sort of muddled my way into solo role playing and Mythic Game Master Emulator just by force reading everything and absorbing everything. And I was thinking, well, why isn't there a clear guide to Mythic in YouTube that I can just watch for 20 minutes and understand what's going on? And that's how the channel started. And if I recall, I mean, well, Trevor is also very influenced by his background and his product because he used to be a filmmaker and then he's now a voice actor. So you can clearly see that on his videos. So it's sort of an interesting pattern that now that I'm saying it out loud, it seems obvious, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's interesting nevertheless.
Yeah. That Mythic engine that you mentioned, actually, I learned a bit about it from watching you. I'd never heard of it when I got into solo playing.
And that's honestly, I think, one of the most interesting things about Tale of Manticore, that you didn't know about the game master.
I didn't know. I'm you can't even imagine how ignorant I am of what's going on. Like, I've never played a 5e game. And it's not because I have some kind of weird OSR aversion to it. Like, oh, no, I'm old school. None of that for me. It's because I got into the game and then COVID happened immediately. And so there's actually been no opportunity for me to try a 5e game. I do the basic thing because it's what I know, just because that was sort of, it's not the last game I played. The last game I played would have been like a 2e game. But I just figured for the podcast, keep it very, very simple, rules light. And so basic made sense. But yeah, I've never even tried 5e. I think I've learned the rules just from listening to other people's podcasts. But I've never played the game. Yeah. Mythic, by the way, absolutely blows my mind. Like how clever that idea is.
It's amazing.
The tables with, is it noun, or is it like adjective, noun? Anyway.
Yeah, something
the tables
like that, adjective, noun.
Yeah. Those tables where you produce these prompts and then interpret them yourself, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. I kind of want to try that. I'm not gonna like switch gears in the middle of what I'm doing, but every now and then I reach a situation in Tale of the Manticore where I kind of wish I was using Mythic, because I'm like, oh, this would kind of solve my writer's block issue, or at least prod me in some direction. And I just find like the interpretations to be like extremely creative. Like in terms of game development, it's for me, it's a much bigger deal than maybe it gets credit for. I don't know how big Mythic is, but I feel like it should be big, pretty big. I guess it influenced like Ironsworn, didn't it?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, it is like the main product in the whole solo RPG thing.
Yeah.
I think it's got around 20 years, the first version, and
oh wow,
it is the cornerstone of everything.
Yeah.
There are some developments right now. I mean, I'm drifting back into my academic hat. There are some new products that sort of drift off from the main assumptions of Mythic, but the concept of having an oracle and prompts to interpret, that's the main method of 99% of all of the solo RPGs that you see, because it is almost obvious. It's almost natural. It's how it should be.
Yeah. I could see novelists using that
Definitely.
as a writing tool. I could see script writers using that as a writing tool. Even if you weren't a slave to that oracle, just the unexpected directions it points your imagination. That's what's magic about that system, isn't it? Is that it just makes you. It is like having another person in the room, giving you ideas or pushing you in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. When I play, one of the I think undiscovered benefits of Mythic is using it as a GMing tool when you are GMing for other people.
Right.
Because I used to joke, it's like having a cocaine-fueled GM all the time around you, like saying, then now this happens, and you're like, well, but this is super crazy. And then he's like, yeah, let's do it. You're like,
right.
Yeah, maybe you're right. And it's usually more creative than I am. That's the main joke that I usually say, because it's true. The things that I would generate are feel very natural to me, but also feel very constrained to me, because that's what I know, or I am the generator. But when you're having an external input mixed with your own creations, it's like it forces you to jump around and to go to unexplored places of your mind. So indeed, the results are very, very creative.
Yeah, there's that trick that artists use sometimes, where they say, like, if you're going to make a painting, and if you could choose like every color or every medium, you get paralyzed by choices. There's so much to choose from, you can't even start. But if somebody says, and again, this is the kind of thing an art teacher would say, like, you have to make a picture, it has to be something in nature, and you can only use charcoal. Go. Now, suddenly, like, the imagination starts popping. Mythic's kind of like that, right? Because it puts these boundaries that force your imagination to get funneled in a certain way. Yeah,
that's
love that
true.
idea.
Yeah. So I think that we've gathered that you use basic D&D for Tale of Manticore. So you don't use any kind of oracle or GMing assistant for the story, I gather.
I don't, but I found it's not very necessary. Once the ball kind of gets rolling, things happen almost organically, procedurally. And although I do have to kind of come up with sort of DM type ideas, a lot of the time it just kind of, the story makes itself, like with the help of die rolls. The die rolls are super important to know what happens to the characters, but most events are character driven. And so as soon as the characters are put into motion, they kind of go where they're gonna go, especially like the antagonistic characters. For me, if there's any kind of challenge, sometimes it's how do I keep all of my player characters, so to speak, if I can call them that, how do I keep them involved in the story? Like, why don't they go like, well, this is done, I'm going to go home now, because that's what would be best for me. And so sometimes there's been, well, how do I make sure that they're all involved? But in terms of like massaging the story, that's about all I have to do. And often I don't even have to do that. It just kind of works. But again, I'm not leading it towards, like, it's not a 3-act play where I'm like, okay, I'm in act 1. I have to set up the big bad. It has to resolve in a certain way by this time. It's not, because it's not a novel and it's not a movie and it doesn't have an arc. My mind wants it to, because we've all been weaned on a billion stories throughout our lives, but it's not that. It is a game in that sense, right? It just goes on and on. And so, yeah, mostly the characters themselves drive the story. And so, yeah, I haven't needed an oracle. There've been, like I say, a couple times where I wish I had one, but most of the time the situation resolves itself. Yeah.
That's indeed very interesting, because it contrasts quite a lot with, for instance, how I play. I came to the whole solo thing because I feared that my girlfriend was going to break up with me if I tried to introduce one more campaign per week. So I had too many systems to play and to try, and
Yeah.
I just wanted people to do it without bothering anyone. So I try to, when I play, I mean, I'm a forever GM. When I play in social environments, I'm always GMing because I'm the one who reads the books. But
Okay.
when I play solo, I still want to keep the illusion or the feeling that I am the player discovering the world. So in a way, I try to make it relatively fair and not try to like cheat, or I guess that I want to keep the door open to the world to surprise me, like to have random things and things that I don't expect. Is that something that you find comes to you organically when you're thinking about the world? Or is the narration so character driven that you basically don't need it and it just flows from the decisions of the characters without needing any surprise from the world?
A little of both. I'm gonna turn it back on you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
When you're playing, do you have a world in mind and your characters are in it, or are your characters basically always at the edge of a blank piece of paper, and you're having to fill in the details of the world as they move into those spaces? Like, for example, do you know that there is a cave to the east, and if the characters go east, they'll find a cave? Or is there just void in every direction, and when the characters move in that direction, your GM brain activates and, oh, now you make something?
Mm-hmm. It depends. If I'm exploring nature, I've assembled a very large set of tools to create everything on the spot. And in fact, for anybody that may be curious, I think that's episode 4 of Stories of Bartova, where I outline all of that. To be able to, as I play, generate that, but not from me, to be able to have the GM, in this case, a very large set of random tables, to generate that. If I'm playing in a city or in a town or something like that, I found that my sweet spot is generating a small outline of the city's profile, like why is the city here, why is it important, who runs it, so which important events happened in the recent years, which gives me narrative seeds that when I get then a random event like, something bad is going on, then I'm able to say, okay, I know that in this city, they've got these problems. So it may be related to these or to a new one. So then I roll for that, and that's how I drive the narration. So it's closer to the blank page, but with a few lifeguards there to catch.
Good metaphor. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm kind of the same, I guess. So it basically, there's a void of nothingness, and then if let's say we meet a character and they say, "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from this place." "Have you ever heard of that?" Other character says, "No." But now suddenly that other place exists on a map, and maybe through dialogue they said where it is. Well, now I know where it is. So if the story ever goes there, that's there. And then basically multiply this by the hundreds and maybe later thousands of incidents of just making stuff up on the spot. And then you get these pinpoints of data, I guess, where things are, and then kind of the spaces in between just kind of fill in just logically. What would be between two towns? Well, like maybe a road, I don't know, something like that. And so again, the story starts to write itself once you activate enough of these little points. Then lines start to connect between them out of necessity with your story. It just makes sense. I know Mythic uses like a rule of logic, right? Kind of whatever makes sense. I mean, obviously there's the random part of it too, but things kind of play out in a logical sense, more or less. And I think it's the same thing with Manticore, that once I do make stuff, I just pull it out of the air, names, whatever. But once they're there, now they are a part of the story, and the more the more points of data there are, the more they do create a kind of a web that connects with each other. Yeah. Right now, I've got a story that's kind of like my characters will investigate an area, and then the story will move them onto a new area. And I find that they're kind of snaking their way through the world. So far, they have they rarely go back to a place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find that I'm continually generating new parts of the world, new NPCs, but they do get left behind. And I wonder, will they ever go back? Some of these characters, I love them, and am I ever going to see them again? I don't want to force the story into a certain direction and railroad them back in a circle just so that we can see what happened to this character or this town or whatever. But I do notice that that's happened for good or bad, I guess. It feels strange to generate all of this lore and then it's gone. It rushes by like a river as the characters just move away. I guess every DM has that, right? They plan something elaborate, and then the character's like, you know what? I think we're just going to go over there instead. And
that NPC just improvised.
Did you plan all that? Yeah.
Moblin the Goblin. Yeah, that one sounds very interesting. Let's make it super important.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that indeed, I am quite surprised because I think that your method is not that far from common solo role playing. It's just you don't support your imagination with random tables or constrain the options with oracles. But the process itself is very similar, which in my mind
I do use random tables.
Oh, you use those? Okay.
I use the ones that you would find in like the BX rulebook.
Yeah, so I actually listened
there is like
with treasure.
It's like a wander. Yeah, there's a treasure one. There's a wandering monster one, and I don't always use those, but I often do. I want there to be lots of dice rolling. It kind of depends. If there's been so much dice rolling, maybe I'll just make something up, keep the story moving. But if I've just been talking and narrating a lot, and I think, well, this is starting to feel more novel than game, then I might bring in a table to make it, bring the gaming back to that story. Yeah.
Okay, so it's even closer then. You're just not constraining your GMing sessions by the oracles and just going with what feels natural.
Yeah, it really is. It is a kind of like, what would the character do that does it? And so, yeah, you'd think that I would need an oracle more often, but like I don't. I just don't.
Oh, I think that's in fact quite admirable about you, because my main limitation is a me problem. Is the problem that I would feel that I'm cheating myself, or that I'm not being fair to my. I would feel that I'm not being fair to my player version of me. I wouldn't be able to separate the two instances. So if you're able to do that, I mean, that's amazing. You're like the Zen master of solo role playing.
Well, I've got issues too. I've got a million problems that are very, I think, specific to solo playing on a medium to be consumed. Like, for example, when you're solo playing, I guess at home, I don't do it, so I wouldn't know, but I'm going to guess. Then you can have a typical gaming session where there might be 4 different combat scenarios, right? Minor, 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 major, that kind of thing. That doesn't really work for what I'm doing, because a minor combat scenario, well, okay, I think a listener would be okay with that. But if then there was another one, and then there was another one, I think that would be super boring to listen to, fun to play, boring to listen to. And so I figure I can't do that. And so one of the problems I have is that at least half of my combat situations end up being potentially really lethal to the characters. And so, and yet I have to have, I feel, enough combat in there for it to be a D&D game, right? It should be like, if 5 episodes go by and there's no combat, then maybe I've lost the plot and now I'm writing some other thing. There's got to be that combat and that exploration and that character, right? Those three pillars, those are important. Anyway, so one of the issues that I've had, and I haven't figured out, is that combat situations are remarkably lethal. I guess that's a bit of an old school D&D thing too, though. So maybe that's appropriate, that characters can die and characters do. They do die. We've well, I won't spoil the show, but I think I could talk about at least one, and maybe there's been more, that like they do happen. I don't know. It's a strange thing, because just like a real gamer, I get very attached to the characters, even though, I don't know. Have you ever played a game where you play multiple characters? Sometimes you don't bond with them, but I absolutely bond with all of these characters, and when they die, that's heartbreaking for me, just like it would be for a player character in a around the table game. I hate when that happens, but I guess very important to what I'm doing is that I can't ever do a re-roll. Like I can't ever fudge a roll, or the minute I do that, what am I doing? You know,
the illusion shatters.
Well, yeah, and also like now I'm writing a novel. I start to fudge dice rolls, right? Anyway, that's the other problem I have with the podcast medium. And I bet Trevor would say this too with his show. There's no way to verify that he or I or you or anybody else that sort of like plays a game and then puts it out there. There's no way to verify that these roles are real.
Indeed.
Right? There's no way. I mean, you watch Me, Myself, and I, and there are plenty of bad roles, right? Plenty. So you do end up trusting that all of the roles are real. But when it comes down to the crunch, are they? I don't know. You just have to trust it. And I'm sure that some of my listeners will wonder, especially when crazy stuff happens, because it does. As all gamers know, sometimes dice rolls have crazy results. 2 20s in a row, are you kidding? It happens sometimes. When that happens, are they wondering, it'd be super easy to just edit out a bad roll and put in a new one. I don't know. Anyway, these are a couple of the issues I'm facing.
I can tell you my own experience. I've only uploaded 7 episodes for now. I haven't fudged any roll. The only thing that may have happened sometimes may have been on the GM emulation part. If a roll didn't make sense or I wasn't able to weave an interesting narrative, then I changed that. But all of the skill rolls and combat, I go with those because I really don't care. I mean, some friends are saying, "Oh, you should kill the Vesna, the character," or no, he should stay alive. I don't care. I mean, I'm not planning on killing him, but if he dies in a satisfactory way, I don't care. We'll see what we can do with that. Yeah.
I've struggled with that. Like, what if I have a TPK? What if just all of my heroes roll 1s and all of my villains roll 20s? I mean, this kind of thing really does happen in games, right? Especially when you have, kind of save or die situations, which happen a lot, especially in old school games. Something's got poison, something's got paralysis, whatever. They can easily wipe out a whole party. So what do I do as a creator if I have a TPK? This is something that luckily hasn't happened, but it's kind of in there like a worm in my brain going, what if it does? What are you going to do? Does the whole story then become a prologue for the next story? I guess that's what happens.
Regarding that, I've thought about that. I feel that if I take Cordoba and any kind of game that I may produce on YouTube, if I take that as I would take the product itself, as I would take a game that I prepare for my friends or for my girlfriend or whatever, a normal role-playing game in which I GM, that helps me, for instance, with TPKs, because, for instance, if my character is beaten by, I don't know, a monster, and the rules say that it dies, that he dies. If that happened with my, I don't know, my friend's character, depending on what they preferred, if they told me, oh yeah, I mean, he's dead, I prefer to kill him, I would kill him. But if they told me, well, I would rather continue, then I would say, okay, we're going to introduce a really major complication with this. You may be captured, you may be, I don't know, crippled or whatever, and we're going to continue because that's what you want. Mm-hmm. So in this case, I think that if, for instance, in Bardova, my character was beaten by some guards, like it almost happened in the last episode, I would probably continue with the narration in an interesting way, not necessarily eliminated him because it may have felt anticlimactic. But I'm also not that much into the old school thinking, so I don't know. You may be different in that, and there's merit in continuing with a TPK.
Yeah, it's a tough one because the constant potential for fatality, it does make a game much more exciting, to me anyway. That chance that the main characters really can die, it's kind of like that Game of Thrones effect, where once you see that Martin will actually kill off a character, although he kind of brings them back sometimes, doesn't he? But anyway, once you see he's willing to do that, the stakes are so high, and it makes the drama so much more effective. And I think the same thing happens in OSR games, whereas, again, I haven't played 5e, but my understanding is that there's
hard to kill people,
very hard to die, but I'm sure that's by design. It's probably because after so many decades of game evolution, game makers learned, well, okay, stakes are high is fun, but you know what's even more fun? Not dying is more fun. Winning is more fun. And we should, we should make games where people feel like they're winning. And so I guess that's where the kind of the 5e mechanics kind of stem from that idea that people want to feel like empowered and people want to win. And so, well, those are the two big differences, because OSR is the opposite. You're very weak and you lose a lot.
Yeah, I think there's also a difference between Manticore and other solo games in which you run one character, because if in for instance, Bardova, that character dies, the story dies with him. In Manticore, the unit that drives the story is the group. One person may die, another character may join, but the group, that metaphysical unit that drives the narration is still there.
Yeah.
So it's easier to kill people in that situation. Yeah. And also in a social game, in a normal game.
Mm-hmm. That's right. In fact, everybody all characters could die potentially, and the story would continue because there are enough of those points of data that we talked about before that now the story itself is the living thing, right? And everything else is just, beings that live on it, right? And so,
indeed.
Yeah, it could persist even if everybody died. But I hear what you mean. Again, if I'm watching Me, Myself, and Die, and I'm thinking, can a character die in an Ironsworn game? I guess probably yes. Yeah, but then what happens to the show if the solo protagonist dies? Do we end in episode 3? We were planning for 12 episodes, but we only made it to 3. Is that what happens? I don't know.
Indeed.
I don't know. I'm sure.
I don't know how Troy would do it, but if it happened to me, I would screw up. That would give me the permission to screw with the character as much as I wanted, to put him into very, very bad states and see where it went.
Yeah. I hear that.
Cool. So, based on your experience playing Manticore, what difference do you feel exists between playing solo, even if you're playing with a party of characters, but just generating yourself a story, versus playing with a group? If there are
less differences or fewer differences than I might have imagined. So I resisted I guess, every step of coming back to RPGs, but I resisted Roll20 for quite a while. I think when we started talking, I mentioned to you that I have a really garbage Wi-Fi in my apartment, and that I was a bit worried that if we tried to do video, it wouldn't work out. I guess since we started talking, I kind of fixed those situations, but back when the world of COVID put everybody on Zoom, I learned very quickly that my Wi-Fi was bad in the apartment. And so things like Roll20, they didn't seem like they were going to be open to me. But I did find that my Wi-Fi could handle a text-only game. If there wasn't video, if there wasn't audio, it could handle it without crashing. And so I joined a text-only game. And so I do right now participate as one of 7 characters in a game somebody else GMs. And I thought, oh, this is going to feel very, very different from Manticore, but it doesn't feel that different. I mean, the work, like, I'm not carrying the workload. Of course, the GM does that. I just kind of show up, play in the space, as they say, and then I don't think about it again for a week. Whereas the GM, I'm sure, is doing all kinds of work behind the scenes. But other than like the amount of work that goes into it, it's not that different. I mean, I play a character who's got probably more weaknesses than strengths, and he has a certain personality, and he just acts in the way that he would. That's about it. And that's the same as the characters in Manticore. They just act in the way that they would, and stuff happens. And the only difference is that in my group game, usually someone else is rolling dice, and in Manticore, I'm rolling dice. And of course, then I type it up too.
So how much of Manticore is it? How much of Manticore is decided with dice, and how much is it just by you, or but by what feels natural to you?
Mm-hmm. I had a listener once write to me and ask, "Hey, is it possible to get the kind of the raw footage of the game?" And I had to write back to that person and say, there is no raw footage. The game takes place at the moment that I'm typing on the keyboard. And so basically, that's the game does get played at, 1/20th of the speed of a regular game, because I'm literally typing it as it unfolds. And then if there's a combat, we go to dice. If there's anything that the rules say requires a roll, like a wandering monster check or something, I go to dice for that. Usually, sometimes I'll adjudicate a certain ruling if I feel like it would be boring. Mm-hmm. For example, characters are moving through a forest. If the rules say that I have to make a check every 20 minutes, then that would just be roll after roll after roll after. It'd be so dull. And so I just kind of say, I'm going to roll once for the day, and then, or once for the day and once for the night, whatever I decide is kind of appropriate. Sometimes, very, very rarely, something will happen that's totally up to luck. And I regret it now, but when I started, I made an attribute score of luck, like, the usual strength, intelligence, blah, blah, blah. I made an attribute called luck. I gave everybody a score, and then I had barely ever used it. I thought I would need it all the time. I think I'd been listening to some Call of Cthulhu actual plays, and they use luck in a really interesting way. I was excited to do that, and then I just found it never happened when I played. And so I'm gonna dump that if I make it to season 2. I hope I make it to season 2. I'll make a couple of adjustments. Yeah, I've made some errors. Definitely one of them is this luck score. Anyway, occasionally I have to do a luck thing. Sometimes I flip a coin or do like a high-low on a dice. So that'll happen. What else can I say? Recently, I kind of moved out of dungeon crawl and into hex crawling. Mm-hmm. And that involves different die rolls, so I've introduced a new system for weather. I basically just took Trevor's, actually. I just roll a D20. High number, good weather, low number, bad weather. Simple. It works for him. And so I thought, I'm just going to borrow that. Thank you, Trevor. I do what I call a stumble upon roll, which just means does something happen that's not a wandering monster? Do they find a ruin? Do they find a town? Do they find a magic pool? I don't know. So I call that a stumble upon. Basically, it's a wandering encounter, not combat. Mm-hmm. So I had to, that's kind of a separate role I do. And then I do the wandering monsters. So yeah, for the hex crawling actually is a lot more left up to chaos. Whereas I find that if you're in a confined space, like a dungeon or whatever, the rules are, there's the combat rules, but just what you would find in a game. If a character listens at a door to see what's behind it, I roll a dice like that, just same as the game mechanics dictate. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like me artificially imposing die rolls, not much. Mostly it's just like an OSR game.
I see. I think that may be related to what we were mentioning before, where if you've got the blank page problem, or you get paralyzed because you have lots of options, the hex scroll is something like that. I mean, by default, well, they travel and nothing happens. And you've got a myriad of possibilities, bad weather, events, food gets lost, you're attacked by a monster, you, I don't know, encounter a traveling salesman. So constraining that into different categories and options helps with generating the narrative.
Yes. That's interesting. Yeah, I think as a DM, that's kind of like if I've got the DM hat on instead of the player hat, if you roll on a wandering monster table and it says, I don't know, 4 to 6 bugbears, I don't know, something. If you just play it out like, okay, you see 4 bugbears, they pull out their spears and charge you. You kind of fail as a DM, right? Because that's an opportunity to make a plot element that can be an important part of your story if you allow that, if you're open to it. If it's just kind of like this speed bump on the way to something else, that feels lazy and it feels like poor storytelling. I would want to say like, okay, well, this says there's 4 bugbears. What are they doing here? Is there a community, or should this now be a more likely thing to encounter in the future? I think that like these events that happen, and I think Mythic maybe is the same. They're not just like a single isolated event, but they have to have a ripple effect, right? They should, every kind of encounter should influence the surrounding and change the surrounding, right? So if there are 4 bugbears, and even if it's just a straight up fight, could they affect something? Maybe they have food and the party is starving. That might be more important than this actual combat situation, is the fact that they found some food or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we're both pointing to how the world is built through these roles, instead of just keeping it at the gamiest moment of, well, speed bump, combat, you lose 5 HP, continue. What does this random result tell me about the world, and how can I build on that?
Yeah, because there's a human brain driving this thing, you can actually make everything matter, and it should, right? Everything should matter, or more or less. Otherwise it's going to be like a computer game, right? Where it's just fight, move on, fight, move on. You can go in, kill every NPC in the town. Nothing really happens because the AI isn't smart enough to interpret these ripple effects. But as a DM or a GM, well, hopefully we are.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Cool. So now I'm going to go to the more constrained questions. Have you had? Well, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into spoiler territory, but do you have any favorite moment in Manticore, like playing solo? Have you had any moment in which you said, "Wow, this is amazing. If this happened in a group, we would all be cheering and saying this is awesome"?
Kind of, yeah. I'm going to go with early episodes just so that I don't spoil it for anybody who's listened past, say, episode 10. Maybe I'll limit myself to 10 right now. I'm about to put out number 24. So yeah, that's half-ish. I think around, episode 4 or 5, when I was playing, I I realized that I could do a flashback, which is something that I rarely would see in games. I probably, some people do it actually. I rarely have seen that, or maybe never. And I thought, oh, I can do this as a kind of a 2-minute segment. So I experimented with it. A lot of my earlier episodes are kind of me just feeling out what can be done with this mode of semi-actual play, because I didn't have a lot of models to learn from. I was kind of just figuring it out as I went. And so the first few episodes, they're maybe a little bit more bread and butter, and then it kind of becomes its own thing, episode 4, 5, 6, 7, and on. But yeah, it was around episode 4 or 5 where I started to learn, oh, I can do this. And these are like my magical moments for me. Like, I can do a flashback, which then has an impact on the present of the story. Like, I had some characters going down into a ruined dungeon area, and they smelled something, but they didn't know what it was. And then in a flashback, I had a character who kind of gets face to face with an embalmed corpse. And then when I flash back to the present tense of the game, I can say, I remember what this is. This is embalming fluid. I know what this smell is. And that moment where I realized I can do this. Games that are actual plays that are improvised, they can't do this. Well, you'd have to have one hell of a brain and an imagination. Maybe some people could do it. I couldn't do it.
I don't think I could
have
do
the
it either.
wherewithal. I don't have that kind of mental energy. But it's something where I can play to the strength of playing very slowly with a lot of time to think. Again, in a live game, I couldn't do that. But in Manticore, I can, because I do have lots of time to think about what would be cool here, what would make this more impactful. And then another time was the first PC death, which was episode 7 or 8 or something, I forget, before episode 10 anyway. I'll draw my line around episode 10. My first PC death, because as I was playing it out, I actually felt something. And then when I recorded it and I heard my own voice back, I could actually feel something, like human feelings. And it kind of surprised me, partly because it was my own voice doing it. And I thought, well, I'd be immune to that. But there was something that felt genuinely sad about this moment, probably just because I had imported somebody's really nice piano music. And I just felt like I've struck a chord. So that's a tired cliche, but I guess it works here. Something resonated correctly at that moment, where even though I was really sad to lose this character, I could just feel it. And I thought, if I can feel this, maybe that means somebody listening can feel this moment in the same way. And actually, since then, and without spoiling further things, good things happen, bad things happen in the story, of course. I do get feedback from listeners all the time now, where you can tell that they've had that similar feeling. And it's not always tragedy. There are a couple of moments of real triumph, where I've had listeners say specifically, oh, the moment I'm talking about, where this really, really got to me in a certain way. Again, I'm being vague because I don't want to spoil anything, but
that's good.
I've had a few listeners say oh, you demolished me when you did this, or, oh my God, I can't believe you actually did that. And I always reply with the same thing, that it's all determined randomly for the most part. I'm just trying to, I guess, milk the maximum emotion out of each situation. And so to do that, I have a lot of tools, I guess, that other podcasters don't have. Again, because I play so slowly, right? I can use a flashback. I can use irony in a way that most people, I think, an improvised game typically goes too quickly to come up with. Well, you could come up with some moments of irony, but really, really deep stuff, I think is hard. Like it takes time to think about it. Or, you know, symbolisms and all of those kind of like senior English class, I'm an English teacher, by the way, all of those senior English class tricks of writing, I can use them. They're in my toolbox. Whereas I feel like a lot of improvised off the cuff stuff, they don't have that. Instead, what they actually do have, I guess, is being funny. And that's probably why so many of them do it, right? Is because it's social and because it's improvised. And so comedy lends itself to that, whereas drama maybe doesn't. Maybe I'm fine. Maybe with you right here and right now, I'm finally getting to the answer to my question. Why is there so much comedy in the world of D&D? I think we've just drilled down and found the answer. I think because that's what works best in that situation. And I think that if you think about the solo plays that are out there, and there aren't many, they do tend to be darker, right? Mm-hmm. Like Me, Myself, and I, it might not be dark. It's not grim dark, maybe, but nobody would say it's a comedy. It's definitely serious.
No, I think it's Trevor's own charisma that drifts it to entertaining instead of comedy.
Yeah.
But the story itself is dark. Yes,
it's quite dark. Yeah, and serious. And then the other very few solo plays that I can think of, and again, there's only a handful of us. I think most of them are pretty serious. Yeah. And I don't think it's because we're necessarily serious people. I think it's because that's like the nature of playing on your own. And especially, I think the nature of playing slowly, I don't know if it's conducive to that or if it just allows that. It's best, maybe it's best for that.
I think that in a way, and I'm not trying to be an elitist here, it is also a reflection of what we actually all want to do at first when we start playing. We want to have that kind of epic Tolkien story of heroes against adversities and enemies. And then we all goof out because, we're with our friends and it's natural to make jokes. So if we don't have that bouncing back of comedic energy, what we're left is the raw story that we wanted to play, that epic narrative.
I know exactly.
I'm not being an elitist here, but...
No, I know exactly what you mean. I think we do want that, most of us. We can't speak for everybody. I think most of us who kind of have that love of fantasy, we want that Tolkien-esque experience, or at least a serious, dramatic experience, heroic, tragic, whatever. But, well, like you said, when you're together with your friends, I think the social imperative, it takes over from your desire to have a genuine fantasy experience. And I think that the joking around, it's just natural. It just happens. And I think you're absolutely right. I think most people, I hope desperately that most people want that fantasy experience, because of course that's what I've got to give. But I think you're absolutely right. I think most people start with that desire, and then a lot of people abandon it for the here and now of having fun with joking around, which is understandable.
I don't blame them, indeed.
No, of course not. In fact, I'm kind of the jokey around, least in character person when I play in a group. In my Roll20 group, everybody is completely in character all the time. I'm one of the very few that will sort of like make out of character jokes and stuff like that off to the side. But most of the players, actually, they're kind of like right in there, no joking, no out of character, right focused. And I'm like, and that's kind of ironic too.
Indeed. And I guess that if that game continues as it should, the story will probably be closer to Manticore than to the comedy D&D games.
Yeah, it is. It is, yeah.
That's cool. That's an interesting reflection we've come up with.
I think we got to something good here.
Indeed.
I think we got to something good.
So on the other hand, we've discussed a moment in which you were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Have you had any moment in which you have said, I really hate doing this, but I must do it because it's what it is, and the story should go this way, but I'm really angry at myself or the mystical GM that's guiding this game?
There have been a lot of times where I thought that would happen, and just a bad roll of the dice would have veered the story right off the rails in a way that I would have panicked over. Have there been anything where I really hit? So far, no. So far, the story hasn't, like the dice haven't moved the story in a way that I've thought have made it terrible. There have been a lot of big surprises in terms of where the plot has gone. But in terms of, no, nothing that I would wish I could redo. I guess just because the story kind of is what it is. Like I said, a TPK would have done it. That would have made me panic. I think it still would have survived. But so far, there have been nothing in game that I regret. Out of game, lots of stuff has happened that's been really difficult. You and I talked about how I had a fire here, and so suddenly I'm trying to produce a podcast without a studio or microphones or even my own computer. That has been a challenge. But in the game, no, actually, it's not only have I not regretted it, but I really look forward to coming back to it. Because especially now, more than ever, in this particular 2020 world that we're living in, that fantasy world is like a way more interesting place to live in than my current situation of teaching in a high school where every day you wonder, is this the day where there's an outbreak has been declared? Actually, speaking of, that day has already passed. My school had an outbreak and I've had to work from home for the last little while. And so just when 2020 has been like that, right? Whenever you think, well, it's about as bad as it can get, then it surprises you in a new way. But yeah, for the story of Manticore, I can't think of anything that I really wish didn't happen. So I'm kind of going through the whole plot in my head right now. I don't think there's anything where I wish it didn't happen. Not yet.
And something like, for instance, when this revelation of Darth Vader being Luke's father, which is something like, God, I hate it, but at the same time, it's amazing. Has something like that happened?
Big revelations?
Where you think this is horrible in game, but at the same time, it's a marvelous narrative development.
Oh, yeah. Oh, but I don't want to spoil it too much.
Well, you can just give a ballpark, like from episodes 10 to 15 or something like.
Right. Okay. So around chapter 12 or 13. So I'm kind of taking a step over my boundary line here. There was a part where I knew I wanted to introduce a couple of real classic D&D tropes. Things like I knew goblins had to be in there and ogres and all their sort of typical cast. But one of the things that I really wanted to get in there somehow was a green slime. And so there was an episode where a green slime fell on a character. And so I try and stick with the rules whenever I can. And I was reading the rules, and it says that if a character walks under a green slime and it falls, it can't miss. And I remember reading that going, oh, that's, I thought that at least this character would have a chance of getting out of the way. And then it came down to kind of rolling the dice to see which characters were going to be hit. They were my player characters, but there were also some kind of, I'm sure they came across as like red shirt characters. In a way, they kind of were. They were just there to grist for the mill. Anyway, one of my player characters was hit by this thing. And I thought, well, this is going to be terrible because their first first level characters. I mean, this is going to be very, very bad. It was very, very bad. It turned out to not be fatally bad for the character. It was a very close thing, but the description of it was kind of so horrible. Maybe this is what kind of to answer your question. Did anything horrible happen that was kind of good in a way? I think maybe this is the moment, because if you go back to your basic D&D book and you read up the green slime, and you say, oh, okay, unavoidable if you walk under it. Oh, that's pretty bad. And also the only way to get it off is to burn it off. And so now I have not just a character that's covered in like sticky, corrosive slime, but the other characters are now thrusting fire at them and burning them. And as I was kind of playing / typing this up, I'm wondering, have I now crossed the line from a fantasy game into just straight up horror? Because look at what I'm writing. It's horror. Like I remember wanting horror elements, but this was like something out of Hostel, you know. It was so brutal. It's not just acid, it's like acid but with fire, and it's on their head. Anyway, at the end of the day, I was just like, well, I don't want to be like gratuitously violent, but this is what's happened in the story.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go for it. And so actually I did kind of describe the whole thing. And then when it got produced into an audio product, then it was sound effects of burning and hissing and screaming, and
I have to listen to that.
My partner's in the other room going, what the fuck is going on in there? Actually, there have been more than one time where I kind of have to do like a yell or a scream, and I live in an apartment building, and I just wonder, God, the neighbors, are they gonna, is this when they call 911?
That's amazing. Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot, John. In case anybody wants to either listen to Tales of Manticore or contact you, just give us your contact points. Advertise yourself.
Great. So Tale of the Manticore can be easily found wherever you get podcasts, whatever you use, from Spotify to iTunes to Stitcher to Pandora, all of them. So easy to find. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter. Pretty much that's it. I don't really do Facebook or anything like that. But on Twitter, my handle is @ManticoreTale. That's TALE. And on Instagram, it's Tale of the Manticore Podcast. And yeah, reach out. Oh, you can also get me at taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. And I really invite people to get in touch. I write back everybody who sends me a note, and I plan to continue to do that. So yeah, if anybody's listening to this and you like the show and you want to get in touch, give me your comments, criticisms, suggestions, whatever. I'm all ears.
So perfect, John. I've had a blast chatting with you. It's been amazing to discover how, in the end, your process is quite different from possibly even the normal, common solo RPG thing, but we all converge into the same thing, which is keeping that illusion of a logical world, of a real world behind what we are doing. That sense of exploration and discovery, it's still there. Again, it's been great. I think that I've got a small cameo on Tale of the Manticore coming in the future. I don't know exactly when, but you should all tune in to listen to me doing horrible voice acting, because I'm no voice actor. We should all know that by now. And I hope we can chat again some other time. It's been amazing.
Let's do it for sure. Thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for doing that cameo. It really, when I get people like you involved in the show, oh, I love it. I love it. It makes the show, I feel, so much richer. And so really, I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on.
It's been a pleasure. Well, bye-bye. Have a nice day.
All right.